Every Sunday morning, before the sun fully touched the windows of their silent ranch, two little girls quietly slipped from their beds and knelt beside their father while he slept, too heartbroken to notice. With tiny folded hands and trembling voices, they whispered the same prayer week after week: "Dear God, please send us a mother." Their father was a wealthy man who could provide horses, dresses, and every comfort money could buy. But since losing his wife, laughter had vanished, warmth had faded, and love felt buried inside cold walls. The girls never asked him for toys or riches, only for someone to fill the empty chair at their table. Then one stormy Monday, as rain poured from the dark sky, a soft knock echoed through the house. Standing at the door was a grieving widow with tearful eyes, worn clothes, and a humble request for work. But none of them knew her arrival was not a coincidence. It was the answer to two little prayers. Since the day his wife was buried beneath the quiet hill beside their ranch, the once joyful cowboy became a shadow of the man he used to be. He worked from sunrise to sunset, filling his daughters' lives with beautiful dresses, warm meals, and every comfort his wealth could provide. Yet nothing could replace the gentle love they lost. Their home was big, but it felt empty. Laughter became rare, bedtime stories disappeared, and the little girls learned to hide their tears behind polite smiles. Every Sunday, they carried one secret hope in their hearts, that somehow God would send someone to mend the broken pieces of their family. Across town, a widowed woman fought her own battle with grief. After losing everything, she lived with sorrow in her heart and barely enough to survive. Desperate for honest work, she walked from door to door, never imagining that her search for survival would soon lead her straight to the home of two little girls praying for her. By the time dark clouds swallowed the morning sky, her worn shoes were heavy with mud, and rain soaked through the thin shawl covering her trembling shoulders, yet she kept walking because hunger left no room for pride. She had been turned away from countless homes, judged by strangers who saw only her faded dress and sorrowful eyes, but something inside her refused to surrender. When the Grand Ranch finally appeared through the storm, she hesitated beneath the iron gate, staring at the large house that seemed far beyond someone like her. For a brief moment, fear whispered that she should leave before another door closed in her face, but the thought of another night without food gave her courage. With shaking fingers, she knocked softly, almost as if she feared her presence alone might disturb the peace inside. The sound barely echoed before tiny footsteps rushed across the wooden floor. Slowly, the door creaked open, and the two little girls stood frozen in silence. Rain dripped from the widow's hair. Her face carried the weight of endless grief, yet her eyes held something neither child had seen in a long time: gentleness. She looked at them not with pity, nor obligation, but with a warmth so pure it felt like sunlight breaking through years of darkness. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the youngest girl clutched her sister's hand, her lips parting in quiet wonder, because the woman standing before them felt strangely familiar, like the comfort they had imagined every Sunday with folded hands. The widow lowered her gaze respectfully and asked if the family needed help with cleaning, cooking, or anything honest that might earn her enough to survive. Her voice was soft, fragile, yet filled with dignity. Before the girls could answer, their father appeared from the hallway, his expression guarded from years of disappointment. He studied the stranger carefully, noticing her soaked clothes, tired posture, and quiet desperation. He had seen many people ask for favors, but there was something different about this woman. She did not beg. She did not manipulate. She simply stood there with humble strength, asking for work instead of sympathy. Thunder rumbled above as silence stretched between them, until the eldest daughter did something that stopped him cold. She reached for the widow's hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around the stranger's rain-chilled palm with innocent trust, as though her heart recognized something her mind could not explain. The younger girl stepped closer, hiding shyly beside her sister, but her wide eyes never left the woman's face. For the first time since their mother's death, the doorway no longer felt empty. The father noticed it instantly, that strange, unexplainable shift in the air, as though grief itself had paused. Though caution still guarded his broken heart, he could not ignore what stood before him, not merely a widow seeking work, but perhaps an answer sent by heaven in the middle of a storm. So, against his usual instincts, he opened the door wider and invited her inside, never realizing that with one quiet act of kindness, all their lives had just begun to change forever. From that day forward, what began as a simple offer of shelter slowly transformed into something none of them expected. She asked for little, worked quietly, and carried herself with a grace that asked for no attention, yet her presence began changing the ranch in ways too deep for words. Each morning, before the sun painted gold across the fields, she was already awake, preparing warm breakfasts that filled the cold kitchen with comforting scents the girls had not known since childhood felt whole. She mended torn dresses with patient hands, brushed tangled hair with tender care, and spoke softly enough to calm the fears they never dared confess. At night, when storms rattled the windows or old sadness crept into their hearts, she sat beside their beds telling gentle stories until their breathing softened into peaceful sleep. Slowly, the silence that once haunted every room began to fade. In its place came laughter, small at first, then brighter each day, like fragile sunlight returning after endless winter. The girls no longer wandered the halls with heavy hearts. They smiled more. They played more. And for the first time in years, their innocent laughter echoed through the house so beautifully that even the walls seemed alive again. Their father noticed everything, though he rarely spoke of it. At first, he kept his distance, convincing himself she was only there to work. But guarded hearts often see truth before they are ready to accept it. He saw how his daughters ran to her after bad dreams instead of crying alone. He watched their faces glow at dinner, eager to share every small joy because someone finally listened. He noticed how she never tried to replace what had been lost, yet somehow honored it with every act of kindness. She treated his late wife's memory with quiet respect, never crossing boundaries, never asking for more than her place under that roof. And somehow, that humility touched him more deeply than force ever could. One evening, after a long day on the ranch, he returned home expecting the same exhaustion that had consumed him for years. But as he stepped through the front door, he froze. His daughters were laughing by the fireplace, their cheeks glowing with happiness, while the widow sat between them, helping sew ribbons into their dresses. The sound struck his heart like lightning, not because it was loud, but because it was something he thought his home had lost forever. In that moment, he realized the emptiness inside those walls had not disappeared overnight. It had been healed gently, piece by piece, by a woman who never demanded recognition. She brought warmth without asking for love. She gave care without expecting promises. And though he still fought the fear of opening his broken heart again, something inside him began to shift. For the first time since burying his wife, coming home no longer felt like walking into grief. It felt like returning to life. And while he was too afraid to name what was happening, his daughters already knew. In their innocent hearts, the prayer they whispered every Sunday no longer felt far away, because day by day, the woman they had once called a stranger was quietly beginning to feel like home. But peace, no matter how precious, rarely goes unchallenged. As the widow's gentle presence became a quiet blessing inside the ranch, whispers began rising beyond its gates. Small towns often fed on sorrow, and it did not take long for curious eyes to dig into the painful chapters she had tried so desperately to leave behind. One afternoon, during a routine trip to town, the father noticed conversations suddenly stop when he entered the general store. Familiar faces that once greeted him warmly now exchanged uneasy glances. Then came the warnings, soft at first, then sharper with every passing day. They told him her late husband had died under tragic circumstances. They spoke of debt, hardship, and cruel accusations that she brought misfortune wherever she went. Some claimed she was cursed. Others insisted broken women carried broken futures. None of them cared about truth. They cared only for gossip dressed as concern. At first, he dismissed their words as the poison of idle minds, but fear has a dangerous way of slipping through even the strongest hearts when children are involved. The more he heard, the more doubt crept into places healing had just begun to reach. Late at night, while his daughters slept peacefully upstairs, he found himself staring into darkness, haunted not by what he believed, but by what if. What if the town was right? What if trusting her meant risking the fragile happiness his girls had finally found? His heart became a battlefield between gratitude and fear. He began watching more carefully, questioning small details that once seemed meaningless. And though the widow noticed the subtle distance growing in his eyes, she said nothing. She had spent enough of her life defending herself against judgments built on pain, and deep down, she feared this home, this miracle, might vanish the same way everything else had. The girls sensed it too. Children always notice storms before thunder speaks. They saw how their father's smiles faded, how silence slowly returned to dinner, how uncertainty crept back into rooms once filled with warmth. Then came the night that shattered the most. Hidden just beyond the staircase, the sisters overheard townspeople speaking to their father outside, urging him to send her away before sorrow touched his family again. Their tiny hearts broke in silence. To the world, she may have been a widow with scars, but to them, she was safety, kindness, bedtime stories, and the gentle hands that made loneliness hurt less. That night, with tears soaking their pillows, they whispered the same prayer as always, but this time, fear trembled in every word. They no longer asked God to send them a mother. Instead, they begged heaven not to take this one away. Meanwhile, downstairs, the widow quietly packed her few belongings, not because she was guilty, but because love had taught her that sometimes leaving was the kindest sacrifice. She would rather break her own heart than become the reason his daughters suffered. Yet as dawn approached, the ranch that had once felt alive again stood on the edge of heartbreak, because for the second time in their young lives, two little girls were about to discover how cruel it felt when love might disappear. Sunday arrived beneath a quiet sky, but inside the house, sorrow felt heavier than any storm. Dawn crept softly through the windows as the widow prepared to leave before the girls could wake, believing her silent goodbye would spare them deeper pain. Her small bag rested by the door, carrying the few fragile pieces of a life already shaped by loss. Down the hall, their father sat alone in restless thought, burdened by fear, guilt, and the unbearable weight of a choice he did not know how to make. He had spent the entire night convincing himself distance was protection, yet his heart felt no peace. Then, through the stillness of morning, he heard something, a faint sound, delicate and trembling. Tiny footsteps crossed the wooden floor. Curious, he followed the whispering voices to his bedroom doorway and stopped cold. There, kneeling beside his bed just as they had done every Sunday for years, were his daughters. Their little hands were folded tightly, their eyes closed, their shoulders shaking beneath the weight of innocent fear. He remained unseen, frozen by something deeper than surprise. Then came their prayer, soft enough to break heaven itself. Dear God, we know you sent her because you heard us before. We know Mama in heaven loves her too. Please, please don't take her away. We already lost one mother. We can't lose another. The youngest began to cry openly, her fragile voice trembling as she whispered, "We finally feel safe again." Beside her, her sister tried to stay brave, but tears slipped down her cheeks as she added, "If she leaves, the house will be empty again." In that instant, every wall he had built around his heart collapsed. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It shattered him in silence. For years, he had believed he was protecting his daughters by guarding them from more pain, never realizing they had been carrying pain far greater than his own. While he mourned the wife he lost, his children had been praying for healing he could not give them alone. And somehow, through all his fear and doubt, heaven had already answered. The widow was never a threat. She was never misfortune. She was the missing piece his broken family had begged for in whispered prayers. Tears filled his eyes as he finally understood that love had entered his home not to replace what was gone, but to restore what grief had stolen. Overcome, he stepped forward, and the girls turned in startled silence. Without a word, he dropped to his knees, pulling both daughters into his arms as tears he had hidden for years finally fell. For the first time, they saw not the strong cowboy, but a father humbled by truth. Through his broken voice, he promised something that changed everything. He would not let fear, gossip, or the cruelty of others steal their miracle. Across the room, unseen by them, the widow stood frozen with a packed bag in trembling hands, tears streaming down her face as she realized their prayers had not only changed his heart, they had saved hers too. And in that sacred moment, beneath the fragile light of Sunday morning, one broken family finally understood that sometimes the greatest miracles arrive quietly and stay because love chooses not to let go. The very next morning, he walked into town with his daughters beside him and the widow by his side, not with shame, but with unshakable pride. Before the same voices that once spread fear, he made his truth clear. This woman was not a curse, nor a mistake, nor charity. She was the answer to his daughter's prayers and the heart his home had been missing. In one brave moment, he chose love over gossip, faith over fear, and family over judgment. Tears filled her eyes when he took her hand, not as an employer, but as the partner his soul had finally recognized. From that day on, the silent ranch became a home again, filled with laughter, bedtime prayers, and a mother's gentle love. The widow who arrived on a rainy Monday searching for survival became the greatest blessing they never saw coming, proving that sometimes, when hearts break the deepest, God sends healing through the most unexpected knock at the door.